Okay, let's get started. Good morning and welcome. Welcome to our CoreTech webinar series. My name is Jane Niederberger, and I am an experienced healthcare tech exec with over 30 years of experience. I've been partnering with CoreTech over the past several years as we bring on more healthcare organizations and focus on our strategy business. I'd like to introduce you to Michelle Burton. Michelle's the principal owner at CoreTech Revolution with over 20 years of healthcare and technology experience. CoreTech has been in business for 15 years, working with healthcare and technology companies of all sizes. And we're excited to be here with you today to share some of these experiences. Today, Michelle will be taking you through our fourth webinar. This is the last segment in our four-part series, and the story is around team building. If you have any questions throughout today's webinar, please feel free to add them to the chat button at the bottom of your screen, and they'll be addressed at the end of our discussion as time permits. Michelle?
Thank you, Jane, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. I'm super excited to share with you today about what it takes to build a strong team and some of the challenges that Jane and I have experienced along the way in building a team. You're going to hear examples from both of us as we have a wealth of knowledge to share with you in this area, so we're both very excited to have you here. As we have talked about before, we've been taking you through a story on aligning goals, sharing values, building trust, and the final piece of that puzzle is how all those things play together to build a strong team. I have said it before, and I will say it again, not to sound like a broken record, but you cannot teach a fish to climb a tree. So making sure that you're surrounding yourself with the right people in the right roles to build the strongest team possible is extremely important. So defining a team is constructed up of a group of people who work together to achieve a common goal. Not all parties in a team should have the same strengths. You absolutely do not want your team members to all have the same strengths. Each team member should bring their own unique skills to the table. When you have each team member who brings a unique skill set to the table, what you do is you build a much stronger, much more solid team. I'm sure you've heard it before, but the mark of a good leader is not how much they know and how much they can do, but how much they surround themselves with people who make them look good. And that's because they're surrounding themselves with team members who have strengths in areas where they don't. So Jane, I believe that you had a really great example in this regard that you wanted to share with the team before we moved on.
Sure. When I was actually promoted to the CIO at Anthem way back in 1999, I made the comment that I didn't have a technical bone in my body. As an aside, that statement got me in a lot of trouble. However, what I was a strong leader, and I had a really good background in healthcare. The reason why that statement got me in trouble is because when you put somebody in the Chief Information Officer role, you expect somebody with technical knowledge and technical expertise. So needless to say, my first priority was to go out and find the best Chief Technology Officer that I could find, who really knew technology in the healthcare space, but more importantly, could help me and teach me to run a strong organization. So in my endeavor to do that, I not only found somebody who had those skills, but it's somebody who I could trust, who would tell me, you need to pay attention to these 3 things, Jane, and these 5 over here, don't worry about them. They're going to come and go. We've got a group who will take care of them. So don't be afraid of filling your gaps with people who know better than you do. It's your whole team will do better because we sailed through technology by hiring the right person. She really, really made a difference and has become a lifelong friend. And you'll learn from them. You'll see what your gaps are, and your gaps will become different and change over time.
Thank you for sharing, Jane. So the next question we have to ask ourselves is, what makes a functional team? And a functional team is made up of several really important characteristics. You have to have strong leadership, as we've already alluded to, strong communication. Everyone on the team has to contribute. The team has to support each other. And as we've already mentioned, you want to have diversity in your team, so not everybody has strengths in the same areas. And then you also really, and I put this as a separate line item because it's very important, you want to make sure you have the right people doing the right jobs, right people, right seats. And so we want to give you a couple of examples in some of these areas. Everyone contributes. This is extremely important. And I have a really great example. So within CoreTech, every year we sponsor an event called Reason to Dance. And it is an event that raises money for Riley Children's Hospital, the children there, the people who support the children there. And it's primarily made up of volunteers. And CoreTech and our team have become one of those volunteers, and we sit on the board for that group. And so we have gotten the opportunity to see how these folks work together. Now, the people that make up this volunteer team are from all different organizations, from all different team members with all different skill sets. Some of them are healthcare, some of them are technology, some of them are, schools, and they're just everywhere. But one thing that I see every time is that they're all passionate about this one thing, this event that happens once a year. And so the entire team always comes together to use their varied skill sets to build a strong event and raise, a significant amount of money for Riley Children's Hospital every year. And it's just a really heartwarming thing to see. But the key part there is that everybody contributes equally. And the interesting part is that not only does everybody contribute equally and come from varied backgrounds, but they all contribute willingly. Nobody is forcing them to, because they're all doing it on a volunteer basis. So it's one of the very things I think we should all strive for as we're looking to build a team, is how do we create that same dynamic where people want to come together with varied strengths to build that same sort of structure inside our team to have the same sort of success that a group of volunteers can have. So I thought that was a very interesting example. Another example that I wanted to share with you is around diversity. So a client that I've worked with for a long time, the Indiana Health Information Exchange, they're a fantastic group of people. But early on when I was working with them, so this has been many years ago, and they've since changed this for the better, they used to give every new employee that they brought on the same test to see if they would fit inside their culture. And as a result, what they had were a bunch of carbon copies of employees. Everybody had the same value system, the same opinions, the same way of life. It was just, and you would think that that would make for a great team, but it did not. It actually made for a very passive team, is what I would say. Nobody was making decisions, and everybody had the same opinions. So when conflict arose, there was no opposite or opposing opinion. And so they kind of got stagnant, and that process wasn't working for them. And as I mentioned, they changed that significantly in the last several years. So that's no longer the case for them. They learned from that example. But I did think it was relevant to share with you a scenario where I saw that there was not diversity within the team, and they had to bring it in. And then, Jane, I know you've got some examples that you wanted to share with the group about strong leadership, strong communication, and support. So I will go ahead and pass the baton to you to share those stories.
Okay. I believe everyone knows that strong leadership is critical to having a successful team. And when I was heading up IT at Anthem, we had a dream of making IT support easy to use and effective so that when you called the help desk, you actually got helped and you weren't on hold for 3 days and then nothing happened. At that point, that is how we were. We were the laughing stock of the company. We were not a very good help desk at all. And Donna, one of my best leaders, was put in charge of making it easy, make people want to call and be serviced by us so that we can have people use their technology more effectively. So she introduced all kinds of controversial change that upset both the frontline staff, IT staff, and the senior execs. She was demoting people, firing people, creating new protocols and processes, new turnaround times. As you can imagine, there's a lot of different moving pieces and parts in a call center, some of it people, some of it technology, and some of it process. And despite the battering that she got with being criticized for moving people that have been with the company for a long time, introducing new ways, she stood her ground. She explained solidly why things were happening, and she continued to show the progress that she was making, that we were making as an IT organization. When her team would go head to head with either a senior exec or a department manager on why things needed to change, Donna always had their back. And they quickly learned that. And I always had Donna's back. So when the CEO would complain to me, I would be the front line of defense, hopefully the brick wall that would never get to my team. And Donna would do the same for hers. So shortly after we initiated this process, the senior execs started believing in our leadership, in Donna's leadership and in mine, that we could actually pull this off and that we were making progress. And then as our team saw that happening, they got on board more and started gathering steam. And so the outcome and the satisfaction in the new processes happened faster. And we have actually implemented something called Access IT. I'll talk about that later in a later example. Satisfaction with Donna's team went sky high, as with all of IT. And then when people called into the help center, they were truly assisted within a very, very reasonable amount of time. And that all came from, I believe, strong leadership on her part and having the backs of her employees. Moving ahead, talking about strong communications, poor Donna, I put her in charge of a lot of difficult situations because she and I looked at outsourcing the data centers throughout Anthem. And for anybody who has made an outsourcing decision when something has been done in-house, you know how difficult that can be and how emotional it can be for a company. Anthem was acquiring a lot of Blue Cross Blue Shield plans, and every single site we acquired had their own data center. And for anybody who is not in IT, may not appreciate how expensive that is. It's prime real estate, the hardware, the software, keeping it running, the team that you need around the clock is very, very high in terms of operating expenses. So anytime you consolidate, you want to do that. You don't need 20 data centers. You may need 2 or 3. So in the process, as we're vetting out data centers and what are we going to keep and what are we going to outsource, the Richmond Blue Cross Blue Shield Trigon had just come on board. And they knew that I was looking at it and that I was evaluating whether we would keep the data center or not. I was giving them weekly updates as to what our process was, what information we were looking at. And one of the jokes said, "Jane, we will appreciate it the day when you show up with donuts and coffee and said, 'I put you through hell for no reason. We're good.'" At the end of the process, we came to the conclusion that we were going to outsource it. And so when Donna and I showed up that day and we had teams divided by which message they were getting. So we had one group meeting with Donna who were keeping their jobs and their work would stay in-house. I was meeting with a group of people who were exiting the company. They didn't know it. They were invited to one meeting or another. And as I walked into the room, one gentleman said to me, "She doesn't have donuts and coffee. Jane, we know exactly what this means." And while it added a little bit of levity to a very hard discussion, we had the discussion about how we were going to outsource. But at that point, nobody was really surprised. They were expecting it because of the process that we had been through and the ongoing communication and the information that we had been sharing with them along the way. So I can't say enough about strong communication. People may not like the messages, yet if we're all adults, we deserve to have information so that we can make decisions that impact us. One of the other aspects of a functional team is supporting each other. And I have a great example of this. When I worked at Harvard Community Health Plan out in the Boston area many years ago, we did an employee satisfaction survey every year in the fall. And the CEO always wanted the results compiled and in a shareable format before the Christmas and New Year's holidays so that he could share them with the organization and have good plans for going forward for the next year. What that meant for my team and I is we worked 7 by 24 between Thanksgiving and Christmas to get these results together for him. And these were the days before online shopping was so big. So you really didn't have time to do Christmas shopping and other things. So we had one person, and this goes back to Michelle's Everyone Contributes to, one person who was the office manager who really didn't have the analytical or reporting skills that were needed to be crunching the numbers. So she would go around and collect everybody's Christmas shopping list and go shopping for everybody and get all the things on their list and come back and wrap them. She would bring us dinner every night if we were working late. And that was the dynamic of the team. And she did it willingly. She was very happy to be helping people and had come up with that idea on her own. So I think that's a great example of people supporting each other because they enjoy the team and it's a functional team. So I think now Michelle's going to talk about the dysfunctional team and the signs of that.
Yeah. So the functional team is where we all, that's our utopia, right? That's where we all want to reside. But I think, unfortunately, we're probably all more familiar with the dysfunctional team. I've had a lot of conversations with different people over the years, and, everybody that I've talked to at some point or another has ended up on a dysfunctional team. And so what are some of the signs of a dysfunctional team? So the first one is obvious, and it goes back to last week's webinar, which is a lack of trust. People need to know, they need to know each other in order to build trust. They need to be able to be familiar with each other. They need to have conversations with each other. Things need to be personal. And one of the great examples, I referred to it last week, I know Jane shared it as her story in our first webinar, but one of the great examples that I keep coming back to is when Jane was a new CIO, and some of the feedback that she got from the team was that she wasn't approachable and people didn't feel comfortable, and so she made a point to go down the hallways and smile and engage in conversation with folks, and as a result, people came to trust her. So you really just have to have that trust, and if you don't have trust in a team, the team starts to deteriorate very quickly. Fear of conflict. So an effective team can have a disagreement and move forward. That's the goal, right? You don't have to have the same opinions. In fact, having differing opinions can add value because, you know, you have opinion A and opinion B, and they come together to create a completely third option that nobody thought of before. But where things start to get dysfunctional is when people dig in to that conflict, or they can't resolve it, or they're afraid to tackle it, or they don't feel like they can come to their leadership to share that conflict. So I'm going to share a personal story about myself. When I very first started CoreTech 15 years ago, there are two things. One, I have a very strong personality. When I have an opinion, everybody knows my opinion. Jane can attest to this. Everybody knows my opinion, and I'm going to dig in because I believe in it passionately. It doesn't mean that I can't hear other opinions, but as my team members were coming to me, they would often feel like bringing their opinion to me, if it was different from mine, a conflict situation, that it wouldn't be heard. And that was a problem. So then that then tied into the second problem related to conflict. I also, even though I have a very strong personality, do not like for the people around me to be unhappy. So conflict amongst my team members early on would cause me a great amount of anxiety. And as a result, I wanted to try and show my team, you know, I hear you, I'm listening to you, I care about what you have to say, and I would scramble. And in a small team, when they see your leader scrambling, it has a very negative impact. It does not. What I learned early on is that it does not, in fact, make everyone happy, because you can't make everyone happy. What it does, unfortunately, do inside that team is it causes them to lose respect for you, which is what happened with me and my team early on. Now, I did take away some very valuable lessons from that, and that is that your team doesn't expect you to always make them happy, because they know not everybody's going to be happy all the time. But what they do expect from you, as Jane already mentioned, is strong communication. And as we've mentioned in the previous webinars, they want you to be consistent. They want you to walk the talk. So if you say one thing, they don't want you to waffle. They want you to stick to it, and they want you to hear them. But if that's not the right path forward for the company or for the team or for the client, they want you to make sure that you explain why that is, and then continue moving forward with what you believe is the best path forward. And when their suggestions are the right ones, because that does happen a lot if you've surrounded yourself with strong team members, you know, being able to hear them, talk that through, and then potentially adjust. What they don't want is a leader who's wishy-washy or always scrambling or reacting to the fact that their team is mad at them. Which are some valuable lessons I learned early on in the beginning of CoreTech. So learn from my mistakes, please. Lack of commitment is the next one that really results in a dysfunctional team. And this is when your team members don't have buy-in. They don't feel like decisions are being made, or that they're sticking to their decisions. And as a manager, sometimes you don't stick to your decisions. As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, your team members like it when you're consistent. And sometimes, and we talked about this in our webinar about goals, right? Sometimes as a leader, you're prey to outside pressures, external boards, customers, lots of different things can play into why, you know, you may be changing your mind, which then causes the team to have a lack of commitment because they're not sure what goals are real and what goals aren't. So we have to, in a leadership role, make sure we understand our goals, as we already talked about, make sure that we promote them throughout the team, and make sure that we're sticking to them. And when we have to change them, because sometimes that does happen, that you're communicating with your team. And Jane, I believe you have a really great example you wanted to share with the group regarding this in particular.
I do. I was actually part of the team, not a leader of the team at this point. I was running operations which included customer service for a major region in Anthem. And one of the things that I had been charged with by the CEO of the region was to outsource all our call centers, consolidate them and outsource them. And so as I was gathering data and meeting with my colleagues who were the different division heads in the Midwest region, one of them, who happened to have the office right next to mine, so it was a painful time, clearly didn't believe in what I was doing. And he put every single kind of obstacle in the way. He actually started rumors about me that I didn't know what I was doing. Look what I had done with IT. If I was presenting, now remember, these are senior vice presidents. If I was presenting in a room, he'd pick up the newspaper and start reading it right in front of everybody. And so it really undermined what I was doing because I had no credibility in his eyes. And again, he's an established business leader, to the point where I had to go to the CEO of the unit and say, what's up? Is this a real goal? Am I really supposed to be doing this? Are you on board with it? Are you going to help me? Are you going to hold my peers accountable for, if not helping me, to at least look like they're supporting me? And so he actually had to step in and basically read people the riot act and do what he needed to do to get them on board with the process that we were going through. Fast forward several years, this guy who was giving me such a hard time was totally on board, but it was a long, painful process where I had to keep thinking about it. Are they really committed to this, or did they just give me this little assignment, which wasn't so little, to distract me for a while? So I think that is one of the very few times where I really had to go to my boss and say, I totally need your help. I can't do anything unless you're going to step in and make it happen. So that's my example, Michelle.
Thanks. So next on the list, I wanted to talk about blame or lack of responsibility. I'm going to guess that we have all worked with a team member or on a team or with a leader who has placed blame or has not taken responsibility for something that's gone wrong on the team. And as a team member, or even as a manager, right, if you're talking about your senior leadership, to not have someone who has your back and instead is blaming you or not taking responsibility for the role that they have played in a project or some effort not following through the way it was intended to, that feels bad. And so you have to find ways to work through that and coach people through. You don't want to place blame. Early on in my career, before I started CoreTech, I used to do it. I think we've all probably done it when we were younger in our careers, and you want to say, it's a natural inclination to defend yourself, right? You want to say, well, I did this and this and this, but this person, they didn't do what they were supposed to do. And I had to learn how to shift my focus away from pointing fingers at other people to instead say, that doesn't matter. Or if it does matter, it matters behind closed doors with that person and their manager. It's a more private conversation. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well. But it doesn't matter for the project as a whole. And so as a leader, you have to shut that down. And that's what I do with my team today. So we start to talk about the problem inside. And when folks start to point fingers at each other in the leadership role that I play, I often say, let's talk about that later. Let's table that for another discussion. Right now, this is the problem, and it doesn't matter how we got here. How do we get forward from here? And create some accountability within the team to fix the problem, and also create some urgency, creating deliverables and working through how to solve the problem. What it does is kind of breaks the dysfunction, right? Because now team members aren't focused on the one person who may have done something wrong and being angry with them, But instead, it brings everybody on the team together to say, okay, we have this problem, and problems happen, things happen, it's okay. We all make mistakes sometimes, but how are we going to fix it? Let's work together. Let's really fix it. And they might be more willing to go out on a limb next time and take a risk, or do something outside of their comfort zone, and, you know, do something they would not normally do, because it creates that comfort to know that it's okay to make a mistake. And I tell my team that all the time. It's okay to fail, but if you're going to fail, fail fast, and let's fix it, because you can't learn if you don't fail. So let's just fail fast and move on. And then there are those people, you know, the flip side of that is there are those people that are never going to take responsibility for their actions. They're always going to blame others. Nothing is ever going to be their fault. I've unfortunately worked with those folks a time or two as well. And so what you have to do is coach them in private, right? I mean, your team knows what's going on with that person. You don't need to make it public knowledge. You don't need to address it inside team meetings. You don't need to point out somebody's failures in a group setting. But you do need to handle the situation. And so as a manager, as a leader, it's your responsibility to pull that person aside and hopefully, you know, try to coach them. But the flip side is, you know, maybe they're just not in the right role. Can't teach a fish to climb a tree. So you have to recognize, am I dealing with somebody who needs to be in a different role? And maybe my goal in being a leader for them isn't necessarily fixing this particular problem, but helping them find something where they do fit and working towards that goal. And so that's one of the things that you have to work with when it comes to blame or lack of responsibility. And the next one to talk about is too comfortable. And this is a tricky one because you want people to be comfortable. Of course, you want your employees to be comfortable. You want your team members to be comfortable, but you don't want them to be so comfortable that they're ineffective or that they start to think as a group unit, because as we've already talked about, you want to have some diversity inside your team. And so the team members need to understand that they each have a distinct role and that it is okay to challenge each other, and to do that respectfully actually brings better outcomes. And Jane, again, I know you had a really great example you wanted to share here, so please.
I did. I wanted to build upon the Access IT example that I had talked about earlier, which is the help desk at Anthem. As Anthem was acquiring more and more Blues plans, the IT organization would become bigger and bigger. And most of my team had grown up in a traditional IT structure with a help desk and different tiers to help people. So we were trying to find a better way to serve our employees so that they would call us and we would help. The way that Access IT came about was we created an environment and basically a retreat where for 3 days everybody had to come up with unique and different ideas, and nobody could shoot down, roll their eyes at, scoff, cough, whatever, at anybody else's ideas until we got to the very end and we were narrowing it, because we really wanted true brainstorming and different thinking. The process started, as you might imagine, pretty slowly with, well, we could hire more people to answer the phones. Well, we could give everybody a new desktop computer, and that would take care of some of our issues. And as people got warmed up, it got to, wouldn't it be cool if they could just call one number and explain what happened, and we took care of all the other things. And behind the scenes technology could make things happen automatically and follow up with them, et cetera, et cetera. So we really went through a process where we were talking about either building a much bigger people-oriented help desk or outsourcing a help desk to building a total state-of-the-art help desk, which we called Access IT, because people had the right environment of being able to bounce off of each other and get new ideas. And as Michelle said, it's a little hard because you don't want the group think. You wanted people in enough of the same place that we were trying to solve the same problem, but we really wanted to come up with some different solutions. So it was a little dance there.
All right, thanks, Jane. So moving on to silos. So I have seen this time and time and again, but I want to go back because as I was thinking through examples around silos, you know, we've all seen them. They're where teams work independently of other teams. And as I was thinking through examples on silos, the one that just kept coming back to me happened before I started CoreTech. So we're talking probably 20 years ago. It was early on in my career. I know I'm showing my age. But I worked for AT&T at the time. I believe they were actually called SBC Global back then. And I was in a project management role. And as part of that role, you know, we had to work with the PM team. We had to work with network resources, we just across the organization. And one thing that I remember over and over and over again was that, you know, our team had our goals and we all worked together to achieve those goals. And the network team had their goals and they all worked together to achieve those goals. And the help desk had their goals and same thing, right? And just on and on and on. But what was missing was shared goals. So none of these teams, if I had a problem and I went to the help desk because I'm trying to solve this customer's problem, it always blew my mind. I thought it was so crazy that the help desk wouldn't help me solve this customer's problem because their goal was different. They didn't share my goal. The network team didn't have the same, you know, turnaround time expectations that as project managers serving customers we had. And so while each individual team inside the organization was working to achieve their goals and being successful at their individual team goals, the teams were not coming together as a whole to achieve organizational goals. And it was a very dysfunctional environment. And it was very hard to work within those confines. So it was an interesting experience. I've seen silos before, but that was definitely one of the most unique. It was almost like each individual team was a completely separate company all of its own. And so it was just a weird dynamic that I thought we're sharing because it just made for a very difficult and unhealthy working environment across the organization. And to be honest, the organization was not achieving its corporate customer success goals. So it was unique for sure. And the last one on a dysfunctional team is the mass exodus of talent. So why do you have high turnover? What's going on that's causing you to have such high turnover? And how can you figure out what that is and what you need to do to resolve it? And so Jane, I know, again, you have a wonderful example here that you wanted to share with the group.
Mm-hmm. In a more recent employment opportunity, I worked for a smaller company that it was totally revolved around healthcare and healthcare technology. And shortly into my stint there, all of our best developers and programmers just started to leave the company. They always were having opportunities. And then, as you can imagine, they would recruit each other because they knew who the strong, good people were and who the weaker links were. And pretty soon I ended up with pretty much the weaker links. So I partnered with human resources to really do exit interviews and not just the standard, why are you leaving? What are you going? Oh, you can make more money. Thanks. See ya. Bye. I was asking them dig deep. We all know that the easiest excuse people will give if they don't want to burn bridges is it's a better opportunity or I'm getting paid more. And sometimes that is the case, but compensation is rarely the reason for people leaving. There's usually a whole lot of other things before they get to that point. So my charge to the HR director was dig deep until you find what the real issues are. And what I ended up finding was that I had several managers who were just immature managers. They weren't bad people, but they didn't have as strong a management background that I had assumed they had, given the position that they were in. They didn't know how to groom people. They didn't know how to partner with people. They didn't know how to let people use their talents. The managers wanted to micromanage them, tell them how to do things, and really treat them, in my words, more like a 3-year-old than a talented adult. So as I was gathering this information, I could actually go back to the team with data, to the management team with data, and say, here's why we're losing people. It wasn't Jane's opinion of why. Given that I was the boss that would hold a little bit of weight, but not a lot over time for credibility. But I was able to outline, here are the practices that we are doing as a management team that is driving people away. Here are the things that they currently like that we need to do more of. And how do we build our own training and internal processes so that we do a better job of hiring and retaining talent? Because as you all know, if you get the reputation for losing talent, you also have the reputation for not hiring talent. So talented people won't come your way. They'll be very leery. So that's looking at the exit interviews and really looking at that data hard and looking in the mirror really hard will help with the exodus of talent. And I think Michelle's going to talk more about that on the next slide.
Yeah. And so the question is, and as Jane alluded to, is, are you part of the problem? And there's a couple ways that you can be part of the problem. And in both of these examples, I'm going to use myself because I really have learned a lot. Being a business owner for such a long time, you just really get a lot of varied experiences and learn how to challenge yourself. So you can't teach a fish to climb a tree. So the first example is really around personal growth. So one of the things that I learned about myself throughout my journey, one is when I worked at Anthem. So when I worked at Anthem, I was promoted into a management position. And what I learned very quickly, and I was really had a lot of anxiety about it at the time because I thought it was just career ending for me. What I learned very quickly is that I am not good at managing people. Which is crazy to say because I own a business, right? But what I have done is I have surrounded myself with people who are good at managing people. But that is not my strength. I can manage a business, I can manage a project, I can manage a team. But when it comes to managing people and their career and their goals and their concerns and their strengths and their weaknesses, that is not my area of strength. Can I do it? Yes, absolutely. Over the years, I have learned how to fine-tune those skills that I did not have, when I worked at Anthem, but it is still not my greatest strength. And so that team that I was managing was floundering a little bit. And I really had to look in the mirror and say, this is not the right fit for me. I am not the right fit for this group of people. And at the time, that's when I decided to go off and start my business full time. So it worked out win-win for everybody involved. But there are times when you're going to have to look in the mirror as a leader, as a manager, as a project manager, as a team member, and ask yourself, am I the problem? Am I the reason that these other folks are not being successful? And how do we fix that? And so that's really one of the things I learned along the way, is that sometimes you've got to have hard conversations with yourself. And the other flip side to that is sometimes you have wonderful people. I had a girl on my team. She was amazing. She was a great person. She had a fantastic work ethic. She was so smart. She could learn anything. But she was not a project manager. She could not be a project manager. She did not like conflict. She did not feel comfortable giving people deadlines and requiring them to stick to it because that felt like conflict to her. And, again, you had this wonderful person, and I didn't want to let her go. She was so amazing. She was so wonderful. She was one of those rare finds, right? And so you don't want to let those people go. And if you're in a bigger organization, sometimes you can help to transition someone like that into a role where they're going to fit, you know. But if you're in a small organization like CoreTech, which is a significant, you know, it's not hundreds of people, then you have to look and have difficult conversations with that person, which in the end, after years of not wanting to let her go, is the conversation that I had to have with her and say, look, I don't think you like this, and I don't think we're being successful. So how can I help you? And I did help her get to a place where you're going to be successful, but it's likely somewhere outside of this organization. And that's really, as a leader, also really difficult to do. But you have to have those honest and real conversations with yourself and with your employees to make sure you're building the right team. Because to hang on to a good person in the wrong role is holding them back. And I know it feels yucky to let someone go or to lay them off or whatever it might be, but sometimes that really is the best decision for both you and that person if communication is strong and if you're having open discussion with that person. It doesn't have to be as painful as you might think it would be. So how do you go about building the right team? You know, there's a couple things you have to do. I think you first have to do a leadership profile. You have to identify, you know, your key metrics. What are you trying to achieve inside your team and inside your organization? And this is similar to goals, but it's one step further than that. It's what do you want your team to be able to do? How are you going to hold your team accountable? What indicates success inside your management team? And you have to clarify and prioritize your strategies. So you need to know what you're trying to achieve. You need to know how you're going to try and achieve it. And you need to understand what the priorities are. If you don't know those things, then you're not going to be successful because nobody knows what their goal is. So once you know what you're trying to achieve and how you're going to achieve it, now you need to understand where your weaknesses are inside your leadership team and where your strengths are inside your leadership team. And so this is the challenge, right? As we talked about in the last slide, you have to learn to have the difficult conversations and you have to be honest about them. Where do you have weaknesses inside your leadership team? Where do people have growth opportunities? Or where do you have leaders who are really strong resources, but maybe shouldn't be leading people because they can lead strategy, they can lead processes, but they can't lead people. And that's okay. It's okay. And you have to look at how you're going to resolve that. And so you look at that and then you start to create your strategic leadership plan. Do you need to reorganize your team? Do you need to modify your plan at all? Do you need to, what do you need to do? How do you need to reorganize that team of leaders so that you can be most successful and that they can then in turn be successful at their jobs? And it's really just a matter of understanding how that works together. Now, the flip side of this is as leaders, you then have to do the same thing with your employees. So what do you need from your employees? What do you need from your team? What should they be expecting from you? They need to understand all of those things. And one step further than that is understanding the roles, the positions. So I recently worked with a client who had a position open for a director level person. They wrote a job description. They brought the person in. They recruited, they hired, they found someone, they brought the person in to be in this director role, only to find out that what they had in their job description was not at all what they actually wanted. It was not at all what they actually needed. And in the end, they parted ways. It was a mutual decision, conversations that they had with the person they brought on to be in this director position, but they parted ways and they had to write a new job description. What do we actually need? If we're being honest with ourselves, what are we really looking for from this job? And then they rehired for that position and now they're finding some success. But it's really important that you understand what you need to have from your employees. And then, as we've already talked about, don't be afraid to make the difficult decisions. You know, do you need to reorganize your team? Do you need to get your team training? Do you need to invest in your organization so that your organization will invest in you? These are all things that you need to think about as you're thinking about how to build the right leadership and supporting teams. So I know we've said a lot, and if you have any questions, we're happy to answer those. One thing to think about as you're going forward and considering teams is that you should consider taking some sort of assessment, whether it's, you know, like a Myers-Briggs. The one that we work with is called the CVI, and it's a wonderful core values assessment. You don't want to take it too far, like we used in our previous example, where, you know, everybody had the same personality, because you do want to have some diversity, but it is good to understand that diversity. So if you're interested in learning more about how your team dynamics operate, we would really encourage you to take that assessment. It only takes about 10 minutes for the initial assessment. There's no charge for that, so highly recommend it. And it's been really wonderful talking to you. If you have any questions, we're open to those. Jane, I don't know if there are any parting words. This is our last webinar in the series, so we will miss talking to all of you every week.
Yes, thank you for your time. Are there any questions?
All right, well,
Okay,
if you think of any questions after the fact, feel free to email us or send us a message, give us a call anytime. We're happy to chat with you, and we love your feedback. So if you have any feedback on these webinars or things you'd like to see in the future, we would certainly love to hear that. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.